Welcome back to Radio Rothbard. I'm Ryan McMakin, executive editor at the Mises Institute, and we're going to talk a little bit about foreign policy today. And to do that, I brought on Zachary Yost. Those who are longtime listeners will be very familiar with Zach at this point. He does a lot of writing on foreign policy for a variety of conservative organizations and libertarian groups. I think you can find a lot of his material at other sorts of publications that we link to here. This would include AIER, it would include the American Conservative and several other organizations. And sometimes he does stuff for us, and I like to have him on the show to talk about specifically things, mostly stuff where I have not been doing reading on it myself. So that's often Asia, which I don't engage with much at all. But there hasn't been a lot going on there recently in terms of imminent conflict. So I've brought Zach on today to talk about, boy, you could probably guess, if we're talking about foreign policy, we're talking about the Middle East a little bit, we're going to talk about Ukraine. And so, Zach, thanks for coming on. I mean, really the larger question is, and I'm sure you've noticed this as well, is if you've always had sort of a suspicious and negative view of where foreign policy is going to end up going with this administration, you've been proven correct in recent weeks. If you always thought, all right, well, Trump's never going to be able to keep up this sort of, I'm going to settle all of these wars, I'm going to fight against the American warfare state, the foreign policy blob. If you were suspicious that that was possible, seems you've now been proven correct. And I think maybe just one of the most depressing things has been the U.S.'s involvement in the war between Israel and Iran in recent weeks. And so let's just look at a little bit of that and really kind of assess whether there's any good news here. My impression is that this administration is shaping up with the previous two administrations, that is Obama and Biden, right? They're not starting any outright Bush-level wars, boots on the ground and all that stuff, but lots of maintenance of low-level wars, lots of ongoing international meddling. I just don't see a big break with that. And so I think just to start off, kind of like, give me your general impression, because we haven't talked in, a couple of months at this point. So give me your general impression of where foreign policy in general is headed with the Trump administration right now, and what you think of that.
Yeah, not in a good direction is the short answer. I was on the more hopeful side. I mean, I wasn't expecting any sudden, dramatic, earth-shattering whole changes, but I had a lot of reasons to think we'd be seeing some more improvements. And my optimism was essentially crushed when Israel dragged us into attacking Iran, which was extreme weakness on Trump's part, in my opinion. And there's been various reactions, at least as I understand it, among sort of restrainers. Some are coping a bit, trying to make excuses like, well, we didn't invade, so, we just did this strike. And there is, one could point to some evidence that Trump just did this pointless strike that did nothing to try and get out of the situation, but it was dangerous, foolish, depending on whose count you go by. We've used up half to, we only have 4 left of those giant bunker buster bombs left, which took 10 years to build, and the production line is not running currently. So that was a huge waste, judging by, there's all sorts of different intelligence assessments of what damage it did. There was a leaked assessment right away that was like, this did nothing. Then there was the real, supposedly, assessment saying, oh, this was great, set them back years, smashing success. Then I think there's been some European intelligence assessments that have been a few months at most. I mean, I think the attack was pointless, and it was so clear. The New York Times had a very long piece on this, that we were dragged into it by Israel, that we literally said, don't do it, Israel. And when Netanyahu basically told Trump, we're going to do it, Trump was like, well, there's literally a quote in the piece that's like, I think we're going to have to help them. And it's extreme weakness on Trump's part, which Is frustrating, especially given the role that the deep state, the blob, played in his previous administration of going after him. They're his enemies. It's not clear to me why he's not driving them out of the temple with a whip, as it were. So, yeah, not looking good there. The Ukraine thing's not as bad as it could be, in terms of we're supposedly going to send something like $500 million in aid to Ukraine, which is nothing. It's absolutely nothing. It's pointless. Not that $500 million isn't anything when you're paying taxes, but in terms of having any effect. And supposedly the Europeans are going to start buying some SAM batteries from us to give to Ukraine. And it's like, well, that's better than us just handing over billions of dollars for free. But at the same time, the Pentagon basically said our stockpile of air defense missiles are at 25% of what they need to be in the event, there's a crisis, some sort of war breaks out, some emergency. We only have a fourth of the air defenses we need. And I would just speculate that even that is probably an overestimation given, the changing nature of warfare. We would almost certainly need more of everything if we were fighting, China, for instance. And the whole pivot to Asia thing, which has never really been working that well, has just collapsed at this point, one could say. And I'm actually think that the U.S. just looks a lot weaker now, given the past 4 years, including Trump's recent actions especially, in terms of what it can do. If China were to invade Taiwan, which very difficult, I'm still skeptical they're planning to do it anytime soon because it would be quite a gamble, quite a risk. The U.S. would suffer incredible losses. The scale of the disaster, I think, is hard to fathom in terms of our extremely limited shipping capacity. Like we have to ship a brigade off to Europe or something, or to the Middle East for combat deployment. It would take months to ship stuff by sea, which is insane. And just not good.
Well, your comments in general remind me of a strange thing that happens when guys like me, I wouldn't describe you as a Rothbardian in foreign policy, but, fellow traveler, perhaps, a sensible foreign policy, right? For people a little bit more radical like me on that, who want far more scaling down in terms of federal spending on defense and that sort of thing. Nonetheless, right, I agree with your general assessment, which is that what the United States is doing is stupid and insane from the perspective of maintaining reasonable and viable military defense for North America. Right. So I get out there and I say anything like, you should stop shipping all of these arms to Ukraine. You should stop giving everything you've got, giving all this money to the state of Israel, neither of which have anything to do with defending the United States or its core interests. Right. But then I always get this parade of right-winger MAGA types who are like, oh, you people, you're just pacifists who don't believe in any sort of military defense. I'm like, you're the one. It's you people who want to completely destroy whatever sensible capability the United States might have. You want to get rid of it all. You want to just spend it on frivolous, worthless wars that have nothing to do with defending the United States. But because your guy Trump said it was important, you're like, sure, let's spend another $500 billion on stuff that has nothing to do with defending North America. They can't even, whatever Trump says must have something to do with important military defense in their mind. They can't even look at the numbers on paper and see the United States is just blowing all of its resources on nothing, on worthless stuff. And they accuse us of being the people who aren't practical minded. And so this just seems to be the setup right now, is some guy at the White House told Trump he needs to get involved in this new war, so I guess I'll do it. I guess I'll just eat all of our seed corn as far as defense resources go. And that seems to be what's going on right now. But everywhere you look, more sensible people are pointing out that the U.S. has the U.S.'s missile defense stuff, which is actual defense military, right? The sort of stuff that I could get behind producing instead of worthless things like another aircraft carrier. Are all that stuff's going out the door and being used to defend foreign regimes that do not care about the interests of the United States. So that seems to be the way the Trump administration is going right now, is spend down all of our actual defense because some lobbyists in Washington told you that foreign country is more important than the United States and the taxpayers that finance everything. And I find it just bizarre that we still have to hear from these people trying to convince us how important wasting American tax dollars on foreign countries is. And then just back to your other issue about just trying to cope with this escalation, right? I mean, it's the standard is really bad when we look at the fact that the United States escalates its conflict with Iran in a major way, right? The U.S. has not been involved in direct military conflict with Iran until all of a sudden under the Trump administration. But then we're saying, well, the escalation could have been bigger. Yeah, that's true. The escalation, but unless we're talking total global thermonuclear war, yeah, the escalation could always have been better. So that's not a very convincing thing to tell myself that, oh, yeah, it could have been worse. Yeah, it could have always been worse, but that hardly makes the Trump administration's policies good. And I just look at just all of this needless escalation, and here's a case in point too, and it doesn't lead anywhere, is I was looking at a Hill article on Trump's latest volley against the Russians and his rhetorical volley, right? And he says, oh, we're very, very unhappy with Russia, and we're going to be doing very severe tariffs if we don't have a deal with them in 50 days. Who cares? Like, the Russians care if you set 1,000% tariff on Russian goods? I mean, this is so ridiculous. Who falls for this stuff? And again, Eastern Ukraine, nothing to do with U.S. interests or anything that would help an average American taxpayer, who, by the way, can't afford a house. Just buy a minivan is like $40,000-$50,000. You're just trying to live your life, and you can't because Trump wants to keep giving money to Israelis and Ukrainian cokeheads. And that's why you can't afford to live your life, is because Trump has buddies in Washington that want your money. It's just astounding that he continues to have supporters. I mean, the administration is just, the whole Epstein thing is just like betrays just what a joke the administration is. But now in foreign policy, remember all that talk about, oh, day one, we're going to have a deal with Russia on Ukraine. That's not going to happen. This is just going to keep going for 3 more years. We all know how this ends. And the next administration is going to keep going. Well, okay, yes, please chime in.
Yeah, I don't know how long Ukraine's going to hold on in terms of holding the line. I mean, things are going much slower than I thought. Russia, I've heard, I think a very good analogy I've heard is they're basically, the Russian advance is a lava flow, slow yet inexorable. And it's very possible, there'll be a crack and a collapse of the Ukrainian forces. And they're reaching now, especially in the Donbass, down, more southern area. There's not much behind the current Ukrainian front line. Basically nothing until the Dnieper River. And so there could be quite a disaster for the Ukrainians and for Trump the more he ties himself to this situation. And the tariff thing isn't pointless. I mean, it's an example of where making threats, it'd be better if you didn't say anything, because the threats you make demonstrate how weak you are. Because we can't really sanction Russia anymore. I mean, this is such a bizarre thing. We're going to more say, like, Russia has changed their entire economy to avoid sanctions. And Putin has basically said, even if the sanctions were lifted, well, we don't want to get tangled back up in that because then they'll have, this hold on us. So the whole thing is we're going to tariff people who trade with Russia, notably India and China. It's like, okay, yeah. This is just nonsense, which is why this ridiculous 50-day thing, the Ukraine won't budge. Ukraine won't budge unless the U.S. just says, do what we say or we'll cut you off. I mean, we're still paying like the Ukrainian state pension plan and everything else. There's not going to be a peace deal. I had some optimism at the beginning. Maybe things can be, but no, I've come to agree with the rather pessimistic conclusion that the war will end militarily, which is very bad for Ukraine and very bad for the Russians who are on the front line, and it's just extremely unpleasant. And ultimately, Trump should wash his hands of the situation as quickly as possible because it's not going to be pretty.
Well, it seems so far away now. It seemed like some sort of peace deal was within grasp in February, where Trump comes in and says, look, guys, Crimea was always Russian. Just get over it. It's gone. And some other eastern parts that they've already occupied. That's fine. But with guarantees then that the rest of Ukraine would be independent, right? Seemed like perfectly reasonable thing. If you're, if your goal is to just stop the slaughter of people, and then you just come back and you deal with it in the future over time. But Americans are so crazed, right, in terms of their foreign policy that they have some imagined ideal of what justice is, and they would rather kill another 100,000 people to attain this imagined ideal of justice, which, of course, is never going to be attained. So the reasonable, rational, the 19th century thing to do, which I consider better in terms of diplomacy, would have been to admit, look, Russia's occupying this stuff in eastern Ukraine. Crimea was obviously Russia. Let's just stop. Just stop the war, stop the killing, and let's move on. That's never going to happen. Trump isn't going to go in and say, oh, yeah, right. Let's just cut our losses, guys, and embrace peace. And so then they invent all these bizarre theories of, well, if you let Russia win in Ukraine, then that means China will invade the Philippines or something like that. I mean, they just make up this absurd nonsense.
Yeah.
And so that's where we are again. Nothing has changed since Biden came in, as far as I can see. And in fact, Biden really was doing a very similar policy. Just draw out the conflict as long as you can and see what happens. So no progress there whatsoever. One thing I do want to talk about a little bit, though, is kind of your assessment of the quote-unquote 12-day war. Mm-hmm. So this, again, comes back to the issue of how many missiles do the United States have to give a foreign country, and what is the role there? Now, some assessments where, and I haven't investigated myself, so I don't really know what's most plausible. Some assessments were, look, the Israelis actually wanted peace because they were running out of defense capability in terms of really knocking down a significant number of Iranian missiles, and that the Iranians still had a significant stockpile backing up what they had already sent to, say, Tel Aviv for bombing, and that actually part of the reason Trump intervened was to just end the destruction of Iranian property and territory under Iranian missiles. Is that a plausible case, right? If this had continued, could Iran just have kept raining down missiles for another 90 days? And which strikes me as that would have been a political disaster for Israel, at least for the reigning party there.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. What's your thinking on that?
Yeah, I've seen a ton of reporting that Israel's stocks were running low of air defense missiles because air defense, like, I don't even really, this is a whole nother topic, but I just, missile defense is not super great the way everyone portrays it. Oh, this golden dome and all that. I think this is going to be mostly a waste of money. You usually need to fire 2, sometimes more than that, air interceptors to have a pretty good plausible chance of intercepting a missile. And it depends on what kind it is. Ballistic missiles, extremely hard to shoot down. Cruise missiles, easier. Drones, much easier. But when you send, if you send a wave of 1,000 drones, which apparently that's what Russia's producing, roughly 1,000 drones a day of these Shahed drones, or Garans, they call them. But, you quickly run out of stuff. And Iran is not like, I guess, I don't know if it's just sort of the usual American ignorance of, oh, Iran over in the Middle East, it's some, dirt poor dump. They are a sophisticated country with 90-something million people there. They, have a nuclear program, a domestic nuclear program that is very capable of going nuclear. They have a ballistic missile program. And those ballistic missiles were hitting targets within Israel. And Israel is, 8 million people, something in that neighborhood. 9 million maybe. Picking a fight with a country 10 times your size and population, not to mention many, many times larger in land area, is not an easy thing to do. And I really think they bit off more than they can chew. I mean, a great deal of this seems to be Netanyahu, being in danger of being thrown in prison domestically. And so every time a new conflict pops up, his trial gets put on hold, which just happened again because Israel started bombing Syria.
Damascus, like neighborhoods in Damascus for no reason.
Well, the reason
obviously
is
there's reason.
Keep the trial delayed.
No good reason. I should clarify.
Yeah.
No reason that plausibly says, oh, Syria is a threat, is an existential threat, or even a serious military threat of any kind to the state of Israel, right? Remember, the state of Israel never had a problem with these ISIS people taking over Israel. They referred those guys to Assad.
We're probably helping them, yes.
Yes.
Israel's grand strategy is puzzling to me. So I wonder if it even extends beyond just Netanyahu needing to keep perpetual conflict going at this point. But the grand strategy seems to be to turn the entire region into Mad Max world of collapsed states with terrorists and civil wars and, people running around chopping heads off. I mean, it seems, there's some writing and speculation that Israel will next turn its eyes on Turkey in wanting to destabilize them, take them out of
which is a huge country.
Yes, and Erdogan literally said, when the war started, the 12-day war, he announced something to the effect of Turkey's increasing its missile production drastically, and Israel is entirely dependent on the U.S. at this point. This is a point John Mearsheimer has made. Back in the 70s, they were holding their own, as it were. They were, they did receive aid, but they were administering themselves. Now they are extremely dependent on the U.S., ranging from the U.S. shooting down missiles that are going to hit them to servicing their entire Air Force. Their entire Air Force is basically serviced by the U.S. Because it's U.S. built, F-35s and whatnot. And that support is not going to last. That's one prediction I will confidently make if you look at polling. The only thing that left and right Gen Z people agree on is not liking Israel. And many reasons to dislike Israel. After what happened with the 12-day war and all that, I view them on par with really worse than North Korea in terms of being a completely rogue state that's just going nuts. The only thing left and right Gen Z on is not liking Israel, and this is really verging, there's a lot of growing anti-Semitism. Or maybe it was always there and now people are just able to say it on X now, but the amount of anti-Semitism I see all over the place now is whoa. And in a sense, Israel has helped bring this about. And it's, what are they going to do in 30 or 40 years when all the boomers are gone and everyone who's coming into power does not like Israel for a lot of different reasons? And they've turned, they succeed in turning the area into Mad Max world. I think they will regret, just facilitating roving bands of, 5th century barbarians basically roaming around. And that'll also increase their incentive to lobby even harder in the U.S. And the whole Epstein thing seems inseparable, really, from the Israel lobby at this point. I did not think much of the Epstein crisis, but over time I've thought more and more to the behavior is so bizarre now, and so many people who are super Zionist are the quickest to say, well, under the rug. So I think it's very plausible. We'll never really know, I think, now at this point, but that Epstein was involved with Israeli intelligence, and that is, people are going to remember that. The 18-year-old Zoomers who basically want to burn the whole system down because they're being screwed over, they're going to remember that. They don't have a fond view of Israel. And it's just not good long-term thinking, but I guess if you're Netanyahu, you won't be around then, so who cares? And his son lives in the U.S., I think, so even less reason to be worried.
What? I'm shocked to find out Netanyahu's son is not on the front line serving in the war in Israel. Wow. Gee, who could have foreseen that? Well, I mean, that's, of course, I totally agree, right, on the long-term view, right? Is the whole, like, we love Israel thing, the whole Ted Cruz Israel thing, it's a product of, like, a subgroup of 1970s evangelicals who basically took over that stuff. It has no relevance to larger Christianity or strains of American ideological thought. And, yeah, it's going to come crashing down once the current Ted Cruz types are all too old to be in charge, or they're just dead. It will die with them. Of course, there's going to be like this tiny 1% of the population that's going to be obsessed with that issue, but it's just not going to be politically relevant. But in the shorter term, right? I mean, just as kind of the final question, what do you see by the end of the Trump administration? What's American foreign policy going to look like? Will there be any change after the midterms? This is just going to be just more of the Obama-Biden doctrine, essentially. That is what I see right now. Is anything going to change?
The short answer is I would say no. And I think that there's just going beyond the minutia of, bombing this and that and handing weapons over. I've sort of come to sadly think the administration is not serious. I know there's serious people in it who are striving mightily to turn the bow of the ship. Elbridge Colby being one of them, Tulsi Gabbard, Will Ruger. But I'm fearing they're the minority. And there was a conference in Pittsburgh just yesterday, from when we're recording this, on basically reigniting the Industrial Revolution. And this Treasury Secretary said at this conference that the factories that won World War II are firing up again. And there was a piece, I think, in the New York Post today saying that Pittsburgh, my native home, will be the seat of the second American Industrial Revolution. And there's also a large conference starting today, when we're recording, in Detroit, Michigan, on reindustrializing the U.S. I don't think that's really on its way to happening. I think there's so many small details that are just not being tended to. Now, like a perfect example for Pittsburgh, this is something I've been quite interested in. I had no idea. I've lived here basically my whole life. The port of Pittsburgh is the fourth busiest inland port in the United States. And the essential aspect of this whole system is the chain of locks and dams on the Monongahela River and then the Ohio River that make the river navigable for barges and whatnot. These were all built roughly 100 years ago. And the Port of Pittsburgh in 2018 basically was like that the Emsworth Lock and Dam, which is like 5 minutes from my house, is in danger of having a catastrophic failure. And were this to happen, the largest coking plant, coke is coal that's basically been baked and it's used in steel production. It produces roughly like half or a third of all of the coke produced in the U.S. And the largest underground coal mine in the U.S. The vast majority of traffic on the river is coal, like tens of millions of tons of coal, would basically cease operating if this dam were to fail, or in a worse scenario, be sabotaged. And the plan to fix it, to upgrade its ancient locks and, shore up its old infrastructure, has been going on since like 2020. And it's not expected to be completed until like 2035, sometimes in that neighborhood, costing millions of dollars. this is just one lock and dam. There's many that need to be updated. And it's just like, we're not serious as a country. You know, it'd be faster to just blow the whole thing up and rebuild it. Empire State Building took 1 year to build, or roughly, and when I was living in D.C., one of the times I lived in Alexandria, the Alexandria bus station had a longer time to complete than the Empire State Building, like just modifying the bus station. We're not going to be able to update the military-industrial complex to a military-industrial base to meet the demands of the future, and I think it spells disaster. Hopefully that won't occur in the next 4 years, but I think we'll just fritter things away. Trump's already bombed more than Biden did in his whole 4 years, especially Somalia, which is pointless. And hopefully things will change. They might. You know, we have to have some hope. There are good people there. The fact that, you know, Tulsi Gabbard is, you know, in her position, Elbridge Colby's in his position. J.D. Vance, I think, is a voice for restraint, but he has to, you know, appease Trump. There's some hope, but much less than I had before, I'd say.
All right. Well, Zach, thank you for joining me today. Yeah, that last example I think was particularly illuminating about, are you going to choose to have functioning infrastructure that allows you to have decent industrial output, or are you going to blow all your money on funding the Ukrainian pension system, right? That's an actual choice that American policymakers are doing. They prefer Ukrainian pensioners to American industrial output. So I think that just tells you where the priorities are. Well, thank you for joining me today. We will be back with more next time. Next week, by the way, is Mises University at the Mises Institute. And so if you have a few minutes, you have some time, check out our channel on YouTube, which will be broadcasting a lot of those new talks live as that progresses, beginning on Sunday night, I do believe, is when Mises U begins. So you might consider joining us online for that. Of course, if you're not one of the students who has already been invited to attend. Zach and I both, by the way. You were a Mises U guy, right?
I attended twice, yes.
Okay.
The best week of the year, as they say.
What year was that, at cost of outing your age?
2017 and 18, although I had been out of undergrad by then. But yes.
Okay. I was, I think, between junior and senior year back in 1998, and I went to that. I only went once. I wasn't good enough to go twice. So. But yeah, I would recommend it to anyone any college student who has not applied for admission to do that for next year. Keep an eye out for that. So thank you, everyone, for listening out there. We will be back next week with more, and we'll see you next time.